For your questions.
Do you think the Steele Dossier included Russian disinformation?
Senator, that's not a question that I'm equipped to answer.
It was in the public news. It was you may have heard of it, the Mueller investigation. It was a $32 million investigation that went over a couple of years. Horowitz was an investigator general, and he looked at the FBI's activity in the beginning of this. And what the FBI concluded was that there were FBI agents throughout this period of time who concluded that, yes, the dossier was full of Russian disinformation. So let's say it is Russian disinformation. You say your new Disinformation Governance Board is going to help the public with disinformation. You claim it's not going to be about domestic, it's going to be about foreigners and those evil Russians. So here's my question. The FBI concludes that the Steele dossier was full of Russian disinformation. CNN propagated this disinformation gladly for years and years.
Welcome back to the channel. You can't miss this clash between Senator Rand Paul and Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Senator Rand Paul grills Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over disinformation and the controversial Disinformation Governance Board. Paul blasts the Steele dossier, calling it Russian disinformation spread by the media, especially CNN. He questions the department's authority to define and tackle disinformation, critiquing government interference in free speech. Mayorkas hits back, clarifying that their focus is strictly on disinformation tied to national security threats. He gives examples like cartel-driven misinformation on immigration policies. Mayorkas insists the board won't police domestic speech or media. The exchange heats up as Paul accuses Mayorkas of dodging the real issue and being inconsistent, particularly with Russia.
The difference, I guess, between your opinion and our opinion is that, as despicable as it is that CNN propagated this disinformation, I wouldn't shut them down. I wouldn't lecture them. I wouldn't put it on a government website that CNN's wrong for propagating disinformation. The problem you have is you're not even willing to admit, we can't even have an agreement on what the FBI said was disinformation. How do you propose that you're going to have an office of disinformation governance if you see the problem in even determining what is disinformation?
Oh, Senator, because our work is not focused on disinformation writ large. Where we, the Department of Homeland Security, become involved is when there's a connectivity between disinformation and threats to the security of the homeland.
Well, that's what the Russians might be considered that. You mentioned the Russians the other day when you tried to pivot away from this being about censorship. But let's say it is the Russians. I know you're not going to ever agree that the Steele dossier, which y'all spent so much money on, was disinformation. But it was, and the FBI concluded. But let's just say there's an imaginary disinformation. You've discovered tomorrow Russian disinformation that's going to hurt our national security, and CNN's broadcasting it. What are you going to do?
Senator,
you're going to tell Putin you shouldn't do this. Senator, what are you going to do?
Senator, let me explain what we do in the Department of Homeland Security with respect to disinformation, and frankly, what we've been doing for nearly 10 years across different administrations. The cartels propagate disinformation that Title 42 does not apply to a particular community of migrants from a particular country.
How are they propagating this?
If I may, through social media. And what we do through U.S. Customs and Border Protection is actually communicate via social media and other channels that is false, that we do apply Title 42.
So let's say there's Russian disinformation as well. Are you going to take to social media and broadcast that people are broadcasting something incorrect about what do you think is Russian disinformation?
Senator, let me emphasize.
Well, you said the other day Russians, and now you're saying not so much the Russians, you're saying the cartels.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not, Senator. You're mischaracterizing my...
Fiery showdown underscores the intense debate over who defines disinformation and how it should be managed. Stay tuned for more political sparks.